It's that time of year again, isn't it? Christmas is nearly here. Time for peace, love, goodwill, all that kind of stuff. Unless, of course, you're H.G. Wells. Things to Come is the oft-forgotten science fiction classic produced by Alexander Korda and directed by William Menzies. But most importantly for this video, it was written by H.G. Wells, who, let's have it right, was an absolute mad lad of sci-fi. He's going to get his own video at some point from me. The film is based on his 1933 book, The Shape of Things to Come, but draws from a lot of his previous work, going back to at least 1897, I'd say. The film follows the exploits of its main character, John Cabal, and his descendants over a 100-year time span. And it starts off in what was then near future of 1940, Christmas Day to be precise. The film is notable for its just lavish production design and art style, and its really inventive use of montages throughout the film. There's about 3 or 4 really interesting montage scenes that take up about 5 or 6 minutes a piece. And the film opens with one of these on Christmas Day, and we hear the sound of caroling, we see imagery of a really idyllic late 1930s Christmas time. But interspersed with the Christmas music, there's a lot of martial music going on, and it then becomes less and less subtle, and it gets more and more to the foreground that war is imminent, because it is everywhere. There's soldiers everywhere, there's newspapers everywhere. War is on the horizon with an unnamed foe. A foe that is deliberately left unnamed for quite strong narrative reasons, yes. But I do get the sense that the real world counterpart to this foe wouldn't have taken too kindly to this film. The main character, John Cabal, is a businessman, and he's living in a city called Everytown in southern England, which is an analogue for London. It's quite clear that it's meant to be London. The family are attempting to make the best of things and enjoy what is quite clearly going to be their last peacetime Christmas. And in the discussions they're having with one another, you're getting characters that are saying things like, hey, I'm pro-conflict because it increases profit and it increases progress and all that. Whereas our main character is sceptical of that. He doesn't believe in that philosophy at all. He's a man of peace. He's a brilliant orator. And at this point as well, you get this really nice bit of foreshadowing as well going on, because he's sort of monologuing and having this conversation, and he sort of monologues a little bit, and he's standing in front of this picture, this beautiful picture of an aeroplane, and he's talking about what he'd like to happen in the world. And the next time you see him standing in front of an aeroplane, he's being borne out. The truth of it has been borne out. And then later on in the film, when he stands there monologuing like that in front of an aeroplane, his vision of a peaceful future has been borne out. As this scene sort of progresses, you get these really unsubtle hints as well. Like you got an elderly gentleman complaining about the high-tech nature of the toys these children are playing with nowadays, and that it's not going to do them any good having this level of technology. Who knows what might become of this kind of mechanisation. And then all hell gets let loose, because there's the sound of air raid sirens in the distance. War, indeed, has broken out. What's interesting here is that you hear about great losses to the Royal Navy, the fleet, and the name of the battleship they choose as well. It's quite prescient, HMS Dinosaur. It's not very subtle, that name. But what interests me about that is that it's the Royal Navy, and this is how far Wells has come with things in his career. When he wrote War of the Worlds, he put the Royal Navy up on such a pedestal because that's where it was in the world. It was the ultimate military force, the Royal Navy. It was seen as completely unbeatable, to the point that even in an alien invasion scenario, the idea of the Royal Navy being defeated would have been seen as so outlandish and ridiculous that the only kind of tactical victory in the book for humanity is when the Royal Navy steps in and rams one of the tripods. Yet here we are in 1936 with great losses to the fleet and HMS Dinosaur being useless in the face of this new technology. as the scene progresses yet further, we hear radio announcements, we hear monologues and speeches from all the characters around them. These are irrelevant, because what happens next is, for its time and in its cultural and historical context, absolutely shocking. And it's probably as shocking to the viewer in 1936 as what Fred's was to the viewer in 1984. War was just something that was foreign. It was something that happened in faraway places that had nothing to do with Britain. Even World War One was on the continent. It was hundreds of miles away. A foreign army hadn't actually landed in England successfully since the time of William and Mary, like 300-400 years before that. But we get this absolutely horrifying and stunningly shot scene of a bombing raid on the city of every town, and for its time it is very graphic. It's very in your face. It's really, really hard to watch at times. It's very intimate at times, but importantly, as the bombing raid progresses, it kind of starts to resemble newsreel footage from a World War One battlefield. Not so subtly as well. It's letting the viewer know that, hey, with modern technology, be careful what you wish for, because war is on your doorstep. It is in your home. I mean, hats off to the bravery of this guy as well. I mean, all he can do is shake his fist at the bombers. And here's that refrain I was hoping I'd never have to use again. And then things get worse. Things get worse because, unlike the real life Second World War, this war dragged on. And it drags on, and it drags on, and it drags on. It drags on until 1966 at least. And by this point, humanity has fallen back to medieval levels of civilization and barbarism. The very heart of the city is in complete ruins. People are still fighting each other. People are still at war with each other, but they're fighting over scrap. They're fighting for bits of coal and stuff like that. They're fighting wearing rags. In actual fact, interestingly enough, they've still got rifles though. They've still got quite modern technology dotted about. But all that technology is for warfighting. And I think the rifles are interesting on their own, because I genuinely think that if civilization was to collapse, an invention like the rifle and gunpowder and the bullet would survive that collapse, because it is intrinsically such a useful invention. Anyway, that's me digressing from that one. I haven't run off to join the NRA just yet. Don't worry, I don't think I ever will. We get this really handy text crawl up the screen, which is actually pretty technically accomplished for 1936. And it provides an awful lot of exposition for us. And it explains to us that the war has gone on till 1966 at this point, where there are no functioning governments worldwide, but people are still fighting each other because they've forgotten why the fight started. Simple as. We've descended into barbarism. There's nothing here for anybody. There's no cities left. All that is left are really small, isolated, inward-looking military dictatorships dotted around in little individual towns. And as a last gasp effort by the opposing side in this war, they've released a plague onto humanity called the Wandering Sickness that wipes out over half of the population that survived the war fighting, that is. So at this point, humanity is down to its medieval levels. And it's at this point as well that the pace slows a little bit, because now we're going to explore the aftermath of this war, this truly devastating event in humanity's history, possibly the most devastating event. And it's important that it is the most devastating event to justify things that come. Vitality is sort of returning to every town at this point, but on like a medieval level. People are just starting to understand that the wandering sickness is now over, the epidemic is done. But in order to defeat this virus with no access to modern medicine, they've gone and installed themselves a military government. They've got themselves a little dictator locally, one that weren't afraid to do what was needed to be done on the day. Again, rather unsubtle, but nothing is subtle in this film. This local dictator is called Rudolph, and Rudolph is desperate to get his shit heap of a bunch of airplanes back in the sky so he can go and invade the local little squabbling territories. This is really small fry, small stake stuff, but to him it's a big deal because he's the boss, he's the man, he's the leader, and he's got his own Lady Macbeth to impress as well. He's in the process of bullying his soul mechanic and his soul doctor into getting these airplanes fixed because he's got a plan. And that plan is to go and invade the next town, because humanity has slipped that far that all of our efforts, all we can ever think about is war. This is not a good future. This is totally dystopian. At this point in cinematic history, in whatever kind of history you really want to look at, this is a real shit show. This must have been horrifying for people watching it. And again, it's tapping into contemporary fears, because although there were characters across the English Channel and certain parts of Europe that really do kind of tally up with Rudolph and his cronies, also in Britain at the time, there was a very strong movement of people that really admired Rudolph and his ilk. So this must have just felt very real and very raw, in the same way that Fred's does it as well. Fred's does this to you. It takes this kind of contemporary setting that you would recognise and feel safe in and make you feel completely ill at ease. However, their lives are disrupted because for years, nobody has seen or heard any airplanes, any technology. Even the engineer himself is down there trying to bodge these planes up, and these planes will never fly. Flying is done. Technology is done. Mankind is done. When along comes a really futuristic and beautiful looking aeroplane, piloted by our hero. It's John Cabal in an aeroplane. Now, we've seen him earlier on in yet another sledgehammerish kind of anti-war message that this film has got. There's a scene where he's in a dogfight with a foreign pilot that sounds slightly Germanic, and this other pilot has gassed this local town and he's crash landed next to it, and John has landed next to the crash site to save the pilot, and they're both discussing how futile this is and how wasteful it is. When the gas starts to reach them, a little girl comes running out of it, and the foreign pilot, even though he's tried to gas the girl and kill all of her family, still gives the child his gas mask so that she can live. And as John takes off with the little girl to safety in the aircraft, the foreign pilot reflects on this in a very unsubtle way. But we must move forward with the plot of this film, because things are about to get worse before they get better. So John Cabal lands and he steps out of this plane, and he's almost angelic as he steps out of this plane. It's almost out of this world alien figure emerges from this futuristic aeroplane that literally is still futuristic now. It's great. It's a fantastic piece of design. The costume looks great as well, even to this day. It's unique. And these people are in their rags. Their clothes are tattered and torn. They haven't got shoes on their feet or food in their bellies. But here is this healthy, well-fed, clean, futuristic, well-uniformed man greeting them. And he's instantly placed under arrest, by the way, because the boss wants to have a word with him. Rudolph needs a chat with this man. Rudolph sort of interrogates John, and he wants to know what's going on. And John tells him, he said, me and all the other scientists, we've had enough of this. We've been fighting each other for centuries, nearly, on and off. And this one's been the big one. And we don't want this no more. We want peace. And the only way to have peace, as far as we see it, is for all the scientists and all the engineers that get together. We've built a place in Basra, and we've got mankind moving again. We're building airplanes, we're building boats, ships, everything. We've brought civilization back to the Mediterranean, and now we're scouting England again. Your days are numbered, boss. Rudolph, listen to me, he's basically saying. And he tries to reason with him. That's a lie. He doesn't actually try and reason with him at all. He just goes in there and just tells him straight. He says, no, I'm back, we've had enough, I am the law and I am sanity, and we are returning to this place because we have abolished national governments and we are wings over the world and we bring peace. So Rudolph bangs him up, locks him up downstairs, and he sends his Lady Macbeth down there to interrogate him, and she's sort of flippy-flopping. You don't know what's happening with her. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that she realises when the game's up. She's a natural survivor. She's had to be a natural survivor in the world she's grown up in. And she knows that it's over for the boss. The boss also thinks that he can just off John and unalive him, hide the aeroplane and forget about it, and nobody will be after him for a good long while. And in the meantime, what he's going to do is going to carry out that war that he wants to have with the people on the hill, which he does. He has the war with the people on the hill, and he wins, and he brings victory to every town and cements his authority even further. In that time though, however, John Cabal has got a message back to his peeps at Wings Over the World HQ in Basra, and they mean business. They are an army of peaceful soldiers. Now they look everything as martial as any of the groups from the 1930s. But the difference is their mission is one of peace. All of that energy which is spent creating and maintaining those groups of the 30s has been spent peacefully creating this organisation. They have futuristic aircraft. They have futuristic uniforms. They have futuristic technology, light years ahead of anything else on planet Earth. Now actually, I'm quite interested in this bit because when I was researching this video, I actually found out that this was actually a real thing. So these aircraft aren't armed in a conventional sense, but what they do carry are these gas canisters that disperse this non-lethal gas called the gas of peace. And I'd watched this film for years. I've been watching this film since I was a kid, and I'd never really thought about it because I thought it was ridiculous, this idea. Complete out of this world gibberish sci-fi. But on researching this video, I actually discovered that the gas of peace was a real thing. It was never used because the German government at the time just decided we don't want this gas, but it was developed. And what it is, it's a gas that peacefully sedates people, and when they wake up, they've got a kind of real pacifist kind of energy about them, and it's a gas of peace because they don't want to fight no more if they're pacifists. Anyway, every town gets turned over completely. These little biplanes they've got are no match for Wings Over the World. Everybody survives, everybody wakes up, and again, more unsubtle imagery. But it's the first time you see anybody really waking up in this film. They look like children waking up from a nap, from malaise, and they're waking up into a completely brave new world. All except for Rudolph, who is the only person unalived by this gas. And metaphorically, he's unalived because his kind are extinct. And then things get better. Because now, John Cabal is in charge. He's the leader of the world. He is in charge of Wings Over the World. All of the scientists, all the engineers have got together and said, right, no more war. We've had enough. National governments just can't cut it no more, so we've outlawed them. So what are we going to do with all this power? Well, they decide they're going to headquarter in every town. And they're going to extract the wealth of this planet for the betterment of mankind. So they set about building a vast underground city. And we get this amazing montage here. This set piece is one of the most iconic pieces of filmmaking ever. In terms of design alone, it is light years ahead of anything. It's beautiful. Nowadays, we would call it diesel punk. That's the modern contemporary word to describe the style of this. But it's got a really cool 1930s futurism vibe to it. It looks amazing. The special effects in this film for their era are really, really out of this world. And then we get another one of the time jumps that this film is famous for. So the time jumps throughout the war period of it up till 1966. And then it moves from 1966 through to 2036, so a century after the film has been made. And for somebody who has been watching the film in 1936, it's obviously different for us watching the film in 2023, because we've got the benefit of hindsight, but you're shown a really utopian vision, and it's very carefully designed. It's heavenly in its design. It looks like heaven. Everything is clean, crisp, white. It is like what you'd imagine somebody in the 1930s would think heaven would look like. The production design, again, is just absolutely amazing. It is so futuristic. You wouldn't see this type of design again for about another 20, 30 years. And you get scenes where it's like a little girl asking silly questions to her granddad, and those silly questions are, why did people have windows in their houses? Well, because little girl, the only chance of getting any fresh air in those days was because you had to build your houses high in the sky. The glass age lasted 400 years, the window age lasted 4, and everybody was sick all the time. And because they were sick, we had this horrible thing called humour. Yes, we had to laugh at things in those days, and the air was never purified for them, and they was always ill again, and the food they ate had to come from fields, and it was real animals they ate and real vegetables they ate. It wasn't manufactured in our beautifully clean factories and given all of the right amount of vitamins for everybody. As a quick side to that, I am going back on that, and that sounds like I'm being quite cynical about it. And I'm sounding really cynical there. But the important thing is, the reason that there is a lot of cynicism there is because, well, I've grown up in that post-war boom environment where we've gone through that whole phase of processed food, and we've come out the other side and gone, well, actually, organic food and normal fresh air is better. But to a person, again, in 1936, who is possibly quite malnourished, or at least never had enough to eat throughout their lives, and to a person who is in the cinema but they're going to go home to a slum dwelling where they've got a single little bit of coal fire, no central heating or double glazing or any luxuries really, probably can't even afford a radio in their house, probably living in one room with about 13 of their family members. That little speech there would have sounded, again, heavenly. The idea of living in a city where everything is laid on for you, where you don't have to worry about food, where you're not going to get a cold, so a cold can't kill you like it can in contemporary 1936. So yeah, I apologise if I sound cynical there. I'm just a spoilt child of the late 20th century. But for all of the advancement, for all of the technology, for all of the lack of want, for all of everybody living their best lives and being their best selves, artists being commissioned to create great works of municipal art at whim, scientists working on just the betterment of their field day after day. There's an undercurrent going on in the city. There's an undercurrent of, hey, progress for the sake of progress isn't progress really, is it? Maybe it's time for humanity to take its foot off the gas and just appreciate what we've got. And on the flip side of that, you've got John Cabal's great-grandson, Oswald Cabal, played by the same actor. And they are about to embark on what is humanity's greatest experiment yet. They've built a massive cannon and they're going to shoot people at the moon with it. Cut 'em a little bit of slack. It's 1936. And the artist, Theotokopoulos, is not happy about it. He sort of starts a rebellion, and the rebellion spreads pretty quickly. And the city has lived in such a state of peace and harmony for such a vast number of years. They're defenceless against it. I mean, he's got no weapons, his people haven't got no weapons, they've just got some iron bars, and to quote the film, they can cause all manner of mischief at the great gun. So Oswald, the leader of the city, decides today is the day they're going to fire the gun, and he's going to shoot his own daughter and her partner into space, arguing that he cannot ask anybody else to sacrifice their child for this mission because this endeavour is so dangerous that it could unalive the people doing it. But he sees it as such an important step for humanity, a really important climb up the ladder, that it must be done, and he's willing to sacrifice his own child to do it. He's dressed all in white, by the way. He's got all white robes on and stuff like that. So again, not so subtle, this film, is it? A sort of standoff ensues, and it's a battle of ideas as much as it's a battle of wills between these two leaders. You have got Oswald, the sort of benign, fearless but driven leader on one side, and you've got a demagogic, frustrated artist on the other side. We don't want it. We don't need it. It sort of sounds like a speech somebody else was making in the 1930s about not wanting certain things because they are completely undesirable. Again, this film has all the subtlety of an elephant in an alleyway. Oswald prevails, and the gun is fired, and a new era of humanity begins. And he gives his closing monologue as he's gazing out at the stars about his vision for the future and the vision of mankind for the future. And at this point, Wells is speaking vicariously through Oswald. There's no denying this. And he speaks of the right to the individual to have rest. But that right must be tempered with the knowledge that you're a long time dead. And humanity must be restless, it must be ceaseless, it must constantly be marching onwards and forwards to the heavens until humanity ultimately has conquered the stars. And that is just the start of our journey. So what is it about this film? Why am I talking about this film in 2023 when most of, if not every single one of his predictions was proved false? They was never borne out by reality with the benefit of hindsight. Well, it's simple. You've heard me bemoaning the lack of subtlety throughout this film. This film has got lots of subtlety to it. There is so much going on here that needs unpacking. At his core, H.G. Wells was very much a pacifist. And this film is a pacifist manifesto. So on face value, the film is about technological advancement. It is about conflict and struggle. It is about societal tension. And it is about the cost of progress. Wells, at this point in his life, was a technocrat. I think he'd given up on the idea of democracy to bring about peace. I think, like him and the generations just below him and the generations before him, anybody that survived World War I was just utterly traumatised. And the idea of another global conflict to them was just unpalatable. Wells comes up with this technocratic utopian vision where all we have to do is give up our reliance on the government to do anything for us, place it in the hands of these experts and technocrats, and because they know what they're doing, because they're scientists and engineers, they will eliminate this ill from our world forever and advance us as a species. And look at when the film was released, 1936. By that point, we pretty much knew culturally that a big event was going to happen soon. Wells was out by a few months. He predicted 1940. Second World War started in 1939. But that's not the important message here. The message is this. Wells was offering this as an alternative vision. He was highlighting the dangers that humanity was about to face and bringing them into very sharp contrast. At the same time, though, he was willing to offer up a complete different vision for society, a way around this. He's going to show you what's going to go wrong and how bad it's going to go wrong and just how low humanity will go. But he's saying to you, hey, it doesn't have to be like that. All of this effort we put into fighting each other, if we used to just put that into peace, look how far we will go. We will fly. And it offers a completely different ideology to the ones being bounded about during that era. I mean, we know the types of people that was in Europe at the time. We know the types of people that was in the east of Europe at that time. Conflicting ideologies. But this ideology is different because we've eliminated the need for armed struggle from it. And I think this is brought into its most sharpest focus during those last minutes of the film. Where again, you see Cabal with his utopian grand vision of the future, and you see this angry, demagogic artist arguing for his more violent and more aggressive vision. And again, you're compelled to make that choice before you leave the theatre. What world do you want to live in? Do you want to go out tomorrow and you want to put on a uniform? Or do you want to go out tomorrow and you want to create art? Do you want to create science? Do you want to move humanity forward? Because it's within your power as the individual to do that. Oftentimes as well, when I watch this film, I do compare it in my own mind to Fred's. Now, Fred's came out nearly 60 years after this film. But it's a very, very different message. Now, they both deal with a near-future conflict which results in the fall of mankind back to medieval levels and whatnot, and all the chaos and destruction and barbarity that ensues from that kind of conflict. But it's different. They're a different type of story because things to come, ultimately, is the metaphor I've used. I'd say things to come is like a sledgehammer that is used to smash into your head. Ultimately, quite an uplifting and positive message. Whereas Fred's, on the other hand, is more like a scalpel that is used to conduct a living autopsy on any notion or any hope that you've got inside your head that World War III is in any way survivable, in any way, shape or form. The film is pioneering as well in so many, many ways. I mentioned before that set design and the general art design, the prop design. Now, Menzies really knew his stuff when he was directing this. He was an art designer himself previously to making this film, but he threw the book at this film. I have never seen a film from this era looking this futuristic. It's beautiful to look at. The designs of the aircraft, the designs of the machineries, the design of the city as well is absolutely out of this world. It's fantastic. They sit in these chairs at one scene. I was watching it the other day and I was like, my God, those chairs must have seemed like something completely alien in 1936. These chairs are made out of like perspex, plastics. The technology they used to create that kind of furniture you see in the film wasn't really sort of created until World War II. And think of those lovely bubble canopies they had on the front of the bombers and things like that. We use that nowadays, but that's a direct result of that conflict. But it must have just seemed completely out there. The design of the city as well, I mean, it's the complete opposite to Metropolis. Now, Metropolis came out over 10 years before this film, and it's got a complete different look to it. Yeah, it is out there, futuristic and science fiction, but it only looks forward, really, about 10 years, 15 years in its look of how the world is in that film. Whereas Things to Come offers you a glimpse into what we would consider still quite futuristic looking stuff. I mean, yeah, of course, I mentioned earlier on, nowadays we would describe that as diesel punk. And again, when you look at Batman the Animated Series, you can see where the whole look of that come from. It came out of this diesel punk aesthetic, which I think takes so much from the look of this film. It's also got a really low key and, if I'm going to be honest with you, accidental environmental message to this film. You have to bear with this one. The war devastates the planet. I mentioned there's no cities left, and they use that opportunity to build better cities But what they do is they retreat underground. Now, Wells was obsessed with this idea of retreating underground. We see this in The Time Machine, written way back. But they say they're going to tear out the wealth of this planet and use it for the betterment of mankind. Fair enough. Doesn't sound very environmental. But when you see how they go about it, accidentally, it actually is. Because they live in these underground cities. And yeah, okay, so above the cities, it looks quite well kept. They look like giant parks, like been cultivated into beautiful, pristine landscapes. Because there's no agriculture, by the looks of it, because everything's artificial, and they're living underground, and all of their energy seemingly being created by, which looks quite an early-ish sort of nuclear power plant, really. Everything's green. There's no pollution in the atmosphere. And if they do, they scrub it out of the atmosphere, because that was one of the ills of the pre-war world, was this pollution. They don't chop down forests because everything they need is within the planet. In fact, I infer from this film that apart from these sort of well-cultivated and well-kept park spaces above the cities, the remainder of planet Earth, that's been left to sort of rewild. Now, I fully understand that most of the credit of this film has to go to Alexander Korda and William Menzies, because those were the visionaries behind this film. They gave it its look, they gave it its feel, they chucked everything at this film. They were both stone cold geniuses, and it's a bit of a myth that Wells had, in actual fact, any creative control over this film. But I asked myself the question, and this is the question that remains to me, and it really was, it was playing on me as I was watching the film. Why would Wells, at this stage of his life, go to all this effort to come up with this magnus opus, this entire manifesto, this pacifist manifesto, this entire alternative view of living and how to live? Why would he do that? And it came to me that Wells was always a pacifist. All his writings are anti-war. Most famously, you've got the War of the Worlds. That's what he's most famous for. But that was allegorical for the actions carried out by the British Empire in Tasmania at the time. It was also, again, designed as a book to shake the Victorian public out of its complacency, to warn of a future invasion by people from Central Europe. And it was in actual fact part of a wider subgenre of books called invasion literature. Dracula falls into this category as well. Dracula is invasion literature, and the entire genre was designed to shock the Victorian public into action. There's lots of the War of the Worlds that demonstrates the futility of war. Also, again, most famously, you have The Time Machine, and that at its heart is a tale of humanity being at conflict with itself until the very ends of the earth, where you've got humanity has just evolved into crab-like beings that are fighting each other on a beach. In Britain, we refer to the First World War. We refer to it as the Great War. And when we say the Great War, we don't mean great as in good or anything like that. Nothing positive about it. We say the Great War because at the time when the Great War happened, it was the war to end all wars. It was a huge, gigantic war. A great war. A great big war. That's where the name comes from for it. That's what it means. But that phrase, the Great War, where millions of people were unalived, was coined by H.G. Wells. And I think that he felt that deeply, that this phrase that he coined was attached to such a large event that he couldn't happily go to his grave knowing that. So I think he set about writing things to come, so that would be his legacy. So people would remember him as the pacifist he was, and the man who warned us against conflict, and who said, hey, you know something? There's a better way for humanity. We can eliminate war. just the same way that Charles Dickens says we can eliminate poverty. And I think that's why he wrote it. I think that was playing on his mind. I think that was his inspiration to set about creating this entire new philosophy.